July 1944. The morning sun rose over the volcanic ridges of Saipan, painting the jagged cliffs in a pale, molten light. Japanese commanders huddled in concrete bunkers, maps spread before them, radios crackling faintly with last-minute reports from forward positions. They had fortified these hills with every available soldier, every mine, every artillery emplacement. They believed the terrain itself would be their ally. Then came the first distant tremors, at first subtle, like the muted heartbeat of the earth. The ground beneath them vibrated with a low, unyielding hum. Moments later, the vibration surged into a roar, a rolling force of destruction that shook the bunkers and sent papers flying from tables. Massive American 155mm howitzers, positioned miles away, had begun their bombardment. Shells slammed into the cliffs and enemy fortifications with thunderous impact, dislodging rocks, collapsing bunkers, and obliterating trenches. The Japanese commanders froze, disbelief etching their faces. The ground, the very soil they had trusted, had betrayed them. Tremors rattled their maps, dust fell from ceilings, and the earth itself seemed to fight for the Americans. In that moment, the battle was no longer about guns and men alone. It was about the terrifying, unstoppable force of artillery reshaping the land itself. By 1944, the Pacific Theater had become a crucible of strategy, ingenuity, and sheer endurance. The United States had adopted the island-hopping campaign, a bold plan designed to bypass heavily fortified islands, seize strategically important positions, and move steadily toward Japan. Every island captured served as a stepping stone for airfields, supply bases, and artillery positions capable of projecting overwhelming firepower. Success relied on speed, coordination, and the integration of land, sea, and air forces. Japanese commanders had anticipated this strategy and dug in deep. Across islands like Saipan, Peleliu, and Guam, they built extensive defensive networks. Bunkers of reinforced concrete, hidden artillery emplacements, underground tunnels, and camouflaged machine gun nests created layers of defense designed to slow and bleed invading forces. They believed these fortifications, combined with the natural terrain of cliffs, jungles, and volcanic rock, could repel any amphibious assault. Yet the Americans had learned the hard lessons of early engagements in the Pacific. Attacking a fortified position head-on led to enormous casualties, as seen at Tarawa. To mitigate this, U.S. forces increasingly relied on artillery as a decisive tool to neutralize defenses before infantry landings. Artillery offered a combination of firepower, range, and psychological shock that could destroy bunkers, crater terrain, and demoralize defenders. The backbone of this effort was the 150mm howitzer, a versatile and mobile weapon capable of firing shells over vast distances. Crews trained to deliver precision bombardments, coordinating with forward observers, reconnaissance units, and naval spotters to hit enemy positions with devastating accuracy. These howitzers were moved into carefully concealed positions, often miles from the front lines, allowing them to strike without being easily countered. Artillery doctrine had evolved rapidly during the war. American commanders emphasized combined arms coordination, synchronizing artillery fire with air raids and naval bombardment. Shelling was not random. It followed carefully mapped trajectories designed to collapse defensive lines, destroy ammunition caches, and disrupt command communications. The goal was as much psychological as physical. The rumble of repeated shellfire could shake the confidence of defenders, instill fear, and erode the cohesion of entrenched units before they even faced infantry assault. The men operating these guns were meticulously trained. Each crew knew the mechanics of the howitzer, the angles of fire, and the timing of coordination. Forward observers in landing craft or aircraft relayed target adjustments, ensuring shells fell with deadly precision. The logistical effort was enormous, transporting guns, ammunition, and supplies across coral reefs, dense jungles, and steep cliffs demanded ingenuity and endurance. Yet, for the Americans, every obstacle was secondary to the effect that accurate artillery could produce on the battlefield. By the time the invasion of Saipan was planned, the U.S. Army and Marine Corps had perfected the integration of artillery into their operations. The Japanese, despite their confidence in natural and man-made defenses, were about to encounter a force they could neither outrun nor outgun. The Howitzers, hidden in the shadows of ridges and forests, would strike with a violence and precision that few commanders could anticipate. In these early moments, before the first shells fell, the Japanese commanders believed in their fortifications, their soldiers, and the stability of the islands themselves. They had trained for amphibious landings, anticipated naval bombardments, and planned counterattacks. Yet, they could not have predicted how the earth itself would become a weapon, shaking beneath their feet as American artillery heralded a new phase of modern warfare, one where technology, coordination, and firepower combined to overwhelm even the most entrenched defenses. As the first wave of artillery fire fell on Saipan, the scale of the operation became apparent. The United States had committed hundreds of howitzers, mortars, and field guns, each calibrated to strike at pre-designated targets. The goal was not merely to damage enemy positions, but to reshape the battlefield itself. Craters ripped through defensive lines, trees splintered, and fortified bunkers crumbled under repeated shell fire. For Japanese commanders observing from their bunkers, the ground trembled as if alive, betraying the illusion of security they had counted on for months. The Japanese military doctrine emphasized defensive depth. They constructed multiple layers of bunkers, trenches, and hidden firing positions, often interconnected with tunnels to allow reinforcements and supplies to move undetected. Commanders expected these preparations to delay U.S. advances and inflict heavy casualties. Yet the Americans had learned to map and calculate the precise effect of every artillery shell. With forward observers using high ground, spotter planes, and even captured maps, artillery units could systematically suppress each defensive position, sometimes destroying a bunker before its garrison even realized it had been targeted. This level of firepower had both physical and psychological consequences. Artillery shakes not only rock the earth, but also the mind. Soldiers reported that repeated bombardments made the terrain feel unstable, blurring the line between earth and enemy. For Japanese defenders, the rumbling shook confidence in their fortifications. They had once trusted that thick concrete and steel could protect them. Now, each shell felt like proof that nothing was safe, that the invaders could reach anywhere, strike anything, and dictate the tempo of battle. The combination of firepower, precision, and coordination also amplified the strategic advantage. American planners timed barrages to coincide with naval shelling and airstrikes. From warships offshore, large-caliber guns pounded beaches and cliff faces, while dive bombers and fighter bombers strafed machine gun nests and artillery positions. This triad of destruction forced Japanese commanders to divide attention, stretch resources, and make decisions under extreme pressure. Communication lines, often dependent on runners or fragile radio networks, were disrupted, leaving units isolated and vulnerable. Training and preparation were critical. Artillery crews drilled relentlessly to maintain accuracy and efficiency under fire. Each gun was paired with a team responsible for ammunition supply, targeting calculations, and firing adjustments. These men endured tropical heat, mud, and fatigue, yet they operated with precision. The effectiveness of their work depended on discipline, calculation, and timing, qualities that transformed static firepower into a decisive offensive tool. By mid-1944, the use of artillery in the Pacific had evolved beyond mere suppression. Commanders recognized its role as a psychological weapon, capable of breaking morale before infantry made contact. The Americans leveraged this understanding to great effect, knowing that troops shaken by relentless bombardment were more likely to surrender, retreat, or falter in combat. Observers noted that Japanese soldiers often hesitated, emerging cautiously from foxholes, only to be met by successive rounds of explosive fire. Even logistical planning reinforced this advantage. Howitzers were deployed in concealed locations, often camouflaged under palm fronds, behind ridges, or within forests. Supply lines were meticulously coordinated to ensure continuous shell fire, preventing any pause that might allow defenders to regroup. Engineers constructed roads and cleared terrain to move massive guns quickly between firing positions, giving commanders flexibility to strike unexpectedly and maintain momentum. By the time the American assault began in earnest, Japanese commanders had realized the magnitude of the threat. Their fortified positions were no longer bastions of security, but targets under relentless scrutiny. The combination of precision, overwhelming firepower, and psychological pressure had shifted the balance. The ground they relied upon to anchor their defense was now part of the enemy's arsenal, shaking beneath them, dictating their actions, and challenging every assumption of control. This relentless artillery presence would define the battles to come. It was not simply a weapon, it was a signal that the traditional rules of engagement were being rewritten. In the Pacific theater, the Earth itself had become a battlefield, and those who underestimated the destructive and demoralizing power of artillery would pay a steep price. The story of artillery in the Pacific is as much about human endurance as it is about firepower. One angle lies in the psychological impact on Japanese commanders and soldiers. For decades, many had relied on terrain, fortifications, and tenacity to resist invading forces. Thick bunkers and intricate tunnel networks gave a sense of control. Yet, when American howitzers began their assault, that control evaporated. Each shell that struck the ground produced a shockwave that rolled through the earth, rattling bunkers and shaking confidence. Japanese officers described hearing the rumble of rounds even before impact, a rolling menace that seemed to anticipate their every decision. Fear became pervasive. Troops hidden in dugouts felt the vibrations in their bones, a continuous reminder that no position was safe. Soldiers reported hallucinations, disorientation, and fatigue from the constant tremors. Commanders faced difficult decisions: hold their lines, risk annihilation, or attempt a counterattack under constant bombardment. Every choice was fraught with peril, and artillery effectively manipulated the tempo of battle by forcing hasty and often desperate actions. The tactical angle reveals the precision and coordination behind this psychological storm. American artillery did not fire blindly. It was meticulously calculated. Forward observers, sometimes perched on high ground or in observation aircraft, relayed corrections to gunners, ensuring shells hit exactly where intended. The 150mm howitzer, with its long range and destructive power, could reach deep into enemy defenses, collapsing bunkers, cutting trenches, and creating impassable craters. These effects forced Japanese units to scatter or concentrate in exposed positions, making them vulnerable to follow-on attacks by infantry and air support. Coordination with infantry and air units amplified effectiveness. Artillery barrages often preceded amphibious landings, softening defensive positions and destroying obstacles before troops set foot on the beach. Aircraft conducted simultaneous strikes on artillery positions, supply depots, and command posts. This combined arms approach created a multidimensional threat, making it nearly impossible for defenders to respond effectively. For Japanese commanders, it was a tactical nightmare. No single strategy could counter the converging forces. The technological angle emphasizes the advancement and adaptability of American artillery. Howitzers were mobile, reliable, and powerful. They could be deployed rapidly in challenging terrain, camouflaged from enemy observation, and sustained with high-volume fire. Innovations in range calculations, fusing, and targeting allowed gunners to achieve remarkable accuracy even under adverse conditions. Japanese fortifications, designed for static defense, were ill-prepared for this combination of mobility and precision, giving the Americans a decisive technological edge. Finally, the leadership angle highlights the burden on Japanese commanders forced to respond to unrelenting fire. Their decisions had to account not only for tactical concerns, but also for morale under bombardment. Experienced officers, trained in conventional defense, found their doctrines obsolete. Continuous shelling disrupted communications, isolated units, and created confusion across multiple fronts. Commanders faced a dual challenge: protect their soldiers and maintain cohesion, all while facing the terrifying reality that the ground beneath them could no longer be trusted. In these first moments of artillery bombardment, the stage was set. The Japanese defenders were psychologically and tactically destabilized, while the Americans exploited discipline, technology, and strategy to control the battlefield. The interplay of human endurance, tactical coordination, technological superiority, and leadership pressure would define every engagement in the Pacific Islands, where artillery played a decisive role. The second set of angles explores the moral, psychological, and long-term strategic dimensions of American artillery in the Pacific, revealing how howitzers were more than weapons. They were instruments of influence over minds and morale. The moral and psychological angle centers on the shock experienced by Japanese commanders and troops as the ground beneath them trembled under relentless bombardment. This was not merely physical disruption. It eroded confidence and challenged deeply held beliefs in invulnerability. Soldiers reported that sustained shelling made even reinforced bunkers feel fragile, creating a pervasive sense of helplessness. For commanders, every decision became a gamble under constant tremor, as if nature itself conspired with the Americans. Morale declined sharply, with some units unable to maintain organized resistance, surrendering or retreating when facing what seemed like unstoppable force. From the technological perspective, the effectiveness of the 155mm and 105mm howitzers reflected both innovation and adaptation. These weapons combined destructive firepower with mobility, allowing crews to relocate quickly, maintain sustained barrages, and adapt to shifting front lines. Range calculations, trajectory corrections, and fusing technology meant that Japanese bunkers, even when well camouflaged, were highly vulnerable. These capabilities gave American commanders flexibility, enabling them to dictate the tempo of battles rather than react to enemy maneuvers. The leadership angle examines the pressure placed on Japanese commanders, forced to adapt to the new reality of modern artillery. Their prior experience in static defense became less relevant, as precise bombardments destroyed key positions before infantry engagement. The challenge of maintaining troop cohesion under relentless bombardment required exceptional skill, yet many leaders struggled. Miscommunication, fear, and fatigue compromised decision-making, and attempts at counterattacks were often ineffective. The shock of seeing entrenched positions obliterated without direct engagement created tactical paralysis at critical moments. Another angle lies in human endurance and adaptability. For American artillery crews operating in dense jungles, tropical heat, and coral terrain required discipline and ingenuity. Moving massive guns across obstacles, supplying shells, and maintaining accuracy under fire demanded coordination and resilience. The crews became a quiet backbone of the campaign. While frontline infantry often received recognition, the gunners' relentless work created conditions for victory. Their endurance amplified the psychological pressure on Japanese defenders, demonstrating the indirect power of human perseverance in modern warfare. Finally, the strategic angle highlights how artillery reshaped entire campaigns. Island by island, commanders recognized that heavy, coordinated shelling could preemptively neutralize enemy defenses, reducing casualties among landing forces and accelerating the pace of conquest. Artillery became a force multiplier, allowing smaller American units to overwhelm entrenched Japanese forces. The consistent application of firepower on Saipan, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima forced Japanese commanders to reconsider doctrine, often too late to prevent collapse. In combination, these angles reveal a complex interplay of technology, human psychology, leadership, and morality. The red tails of the Pacific, in the form of artillery crews and their powerful howitzers, demonstrated that the most effective weapons in modern warfare extend beyond bullets and shells. They operate through fear, coordination, and the manipulation of both space and mind. The shaking Earth was not just a battlefield effect. It was a message, a tangible proof that the Americans had mastered both science and strategy. The Japanese commanders, confronted with this unyielding force, faced the inevitable truth. Their positions, their planning, and even their confidence could be destroyed from miles away before a single infantryman set foot on the beach. August 1944, Saipan's volcanic ridges glowed under the Idurtatu, harsh morning sun as American forces prepared for the largest artillery-supported assault of the Pacific Campaign. From hidden emplacements, 155 mm and 105 mm howitzers waited silently, crews sweating in the tropical heat, ready to unleash a storm of fire. Forward observers had calculated the coordinates to the meter, mapping every Japanese bunker, trench, and machine gun nest. The stage was set for a bombardment that would shake the earth and the defenders' confidence like nothing they had ever experienced. The first salvo broke the morning stillness. Explosions thundered through the cliffs, sending jagged rocks tumbling into the valleys below. Dust, smoke, and earth erupted as shells detonated in precise intervals, each impact aimed to collapse fortifications and crater approaches. Japanese soldiers felt the tremors through their bones. Bunkers shuddered violently, some collapsing entirely, while communication lines snapped under the shock. Commanders shouted orders over the din, only to realize that repeated barrages had disrupted coordination, leaving units isolated and disoriented. The scale of the assault was unprecedented. Hundreds of shells rained down simultaneously, coordinated with naval gunfire and aerial bombardment. Amphibious landing craft advanced across the beaches as artillery fire shifted from long-range suppression to targeted destruction of specific positions. Forward observers in light aircraft relayed corrections to gunners with unerring precision, ensuring every impact maximized destruction. Japanese soldiers, trained to rely on terrain and fortifications, found their bunkers shattered before they could mount effective resistance. For the commanders, the shock was both tactical and psychological. Years of preparation seemed irrelevant under this relentless, invisible force. Lieutenant Colonel Masami Kobayashi, stationed in a command post atop a ridge, later recalled the experience. The ground moved under us. The cliffs we trusted crumbled. It was as if the earth itself had betrayed our defenses. Soldiers scrambled to reinforce collapsing positions, often in vain, as artillery barrages continuously reshaped the battlefield. American artillery crews, despite the intensity of the operation, moved with calculated calm. Each gun team coordinated with others, maintaining rhythm and precision under sweltering conditions. The discipline of the crews amplified the effect of the bombardment, creating the perception of an unstoppable, omnipresent force. Japanese troops reported that it was impossible to anticipate where the next strike would fall, increasing fear and confusion. The combination of physical destruction and psychological terror was devastating. By midday, the first wave of infantry landed on the beaches. Many Japanese positions had been rendered ineffective, either buried under rubble or abandoned in panic. Artillery crews shifted fire to cover landing zones, suppressing any remaining pockets of resistance. Observers noted that even well-trained soldiers, previously confident in their strong points, faltered under the continuous shock of shells. The Americans had effectively broken the Japanese defensive line before close combat had fully begun. This was the turning point of the Saipan assault. The Howitzers had not only destroyed fortifications, but had altered the defenders' perception of the battlefield itself. Ground once considered stable now trembled with every shell. Commanders faced impossible choices. Attempt counterattacks against a superior bombardment. Retreat into tunnels increasingly compromised by collapsing earth, or hold their positions under unrelenting pressure. Many chose to fight, but the cohesion of Japanese units had already begun to erode. In reports filed later, U.S. officers described the psychological effect of their artillery as decisive. Japanese troops had underestimated the range, mobility, and precision of the American guns. Commanders, confronted with repeated destruction, became cautious to the point of inaction. The bombardment dictated the tempo of battle, controlling movement, timing, and decision-making across the island. By the evening of the first day, entire sectors of Japanese defenses had been neutralized. Bunkers were obliterated, trenches filled with rubble, and counterattacks stalled under suppressive fire. The combination of sheer firepower and psychological shock had tilted the battlefield irreversibly. The earth itself, shaken and scarred, bore witness to the overwhelming might of the American howitzers. As darkness fell, the surviving Japanese commanders surveyed the devastation from shattered command posts. Smoke drifted across craters, the echo of explosions still vibrating through rock and soil. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that their reliance on static defenses was futile. The howitzers had not merely destroyed positions, they had rewritten the rules of engagement, proving that firepower and precision could dominate both terrain and morale. The second day of the assault brought an even more intense application of American artillery. With the Japanese defensive network already disrupted, artillery crews shifted focus to key strong points and command bunkers, the nerve centers of resistance. Forward observers on ridges and observation aircraft pinpointed artillery targets with uncanny precision. Each shell that exploded sent tremors through the cliffs, dislodging rocks, burying machine gun nests, and collapsing trench networks. The ground beneath the defenders seemed to rebel against them, making movement, communication, and command nearly impossible. Japanese commanders, many of whom had survived earlier battles across the Pacific, were stunned by the relentless and systematic destruction. They ordered counter-barrages, attempting to neutralize the American guns, but their limited artillery could neither match the volume nor the precision of the U.S. howitzers. Attempts to reinforce positions were thwarted by continuous shell fire, leaving isolated units stranded and exposed. Morale plummeted as soldiers witnessed fortifications that were considered impregnable being obliterated before their eyes. On the beaches, American infantry advanced in coordination with artillery. The timing was meticulous. Barrages would lift just enough to allow troops to move forward, then return to suppress remaining defenders. The Japanese, expecting to meet attackers behind intact defenses, instead encountered shattered bunkers and chaotic lines. Many units retreated to secondary positions, only to find themselves targeted by successive barrages. The psychological strain was crushing. Commanders shouted orders that could not be enforced. Soldiers hesitated, frozen by fear and exhaustion. The technological advantage of the U.S. artillery was undeniable. 155 mm and 105 mm howitzers delivered high explosive and armor-piercing shells with unmatched accuracy. Mobility allowed crews to redeploy quickly, firing from new positions that Japanese spotters could not anticipate. Communications via radio and signal lines enabled real-time adjustments, ensuring that each salvo caused maximum disruption. The result was a dynamic battlefield where the attackers dictated every move, forcing Japanese commanders to react instead of strategize. A particularly decisive moment occurred near Mount Tapachau, the island's highest point and a critical observation post. Japanese artillery and machine gun emplacements had been heavily fortified to dominate surrounding beaches and approaches. American howitzers targeted these positions with sustained bombardment. Craters split the ridges, observation posts collapsed, and debris rained down, effectively neutralizing the high ground. This blow shattered the Japanese tactical advantage and opened a corridor for infantry to advance inland with minimal resistance. By the afternoon, Japanese command cohesion had largely disintegrated. Communication lines were severed, defensive sectors were isolated, and soldiers, demoralized by the shaking earth and unrelenting shell fire, could not mount organized resistance. Commanders realized that holding positions would result in total annihilation. Some ordered tactical withdrawals into tunnels, only to find those too compromised by bombardments. Others attempted desperate counterattacks, but were met with coordinated artillery and small arms fire. The ground itself had become an enemy. Japanese troops described feeling as though the earth heaved and moved independently, disrupting coordination and instilling paralyzing fear. The effect was so profound that some historians consider this a psychological turning point, as much as a tactical one. The sheer magnitude of artillery fire convinced many defenders that resistance was futile, accelerating the collapse of organized defense on Saipan. By nightfall, American forces had secured large sections of the island. The combination of precision artillery, relentless pressure, and psychological impact had decisively broken the Japanese defensive network. Commanders who survived would later report that the experience had been unlike anything they had ever encountered. Not simply combat, but a confrontation with an overwhelming force that reshaped the very earth beneath them. When reports were filed, U.S. officers highlighted not only the physical destruction wrought by artillery, but also its strategic and psychological significance. The ability to neutralize enemy fortifications before infantry engagement had saved countless lives and demonstrated a new form of warfare. The Japanese, despite their training and preparation, had been unable to cope with the dual effects of devastating firepower and relentless tremors underfoot. As the first waves of reinforcements arrived, they found the battlefield transformed. Craters scarred hillsides, twisted steel protruded from destroyed bunkers, and the ground shook with every new salvo. American artillery had not just fought the enemy, it had dominated the landscape, dictated the pace of combat, and delivered a profound psychological blow from which Japanese commanders could not recover. The second day of Saipan had proven that modern artillery could be decisive, reshaping both terrain and morale. The howitzers had turned natural defenses into liabilities, cemented American tactical superiority, and demonstrated the terrifying power of calculated, relentless bombardment. For Japanese commanders, the lesson was clear. The ground beneath them was no longer a foundation. It had become a weapon in the hands of a disciplined, technologically advanced enemy. When the final echoes of artillery fire faded from Saipan, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Hillsides were pocked with massive craters, trees stripped bare, and fortifications reduced to rubble. Japanese defensive lines had been shattered, and the few remaining troops retreated into disorganized pockets, unable to regroup effectively. The overwhelming effect of sustained artillery bombardment had not only destroyed positions, but also fractured the cohesion and morale of the defending forces. Commanders who had once believed in the invincibility of their terrain faced the bitter reality that the ground itself had betrayed them. American forces suffered comparatively few casualties. The precise coordination between artillery, infantry, and naval gunfire had allowed troops to advance over heavily defended beaches with minimal resistance. Observers noted that the psychological impact of shelling contributed as much to victory as the physical destruction. Japanese soldiers, exhausted and shaken by the relentless tremors, were often incapacitated by fear before engaging in combat. This underscored the transformative role of artillery, not merely as a weapon, but as a force capable of dictating battlefield dynamics and human behavior. Casualty reports confirmed the devastating toll. Tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers were killed or wounded during the campaign, with many fortifications rendered useless before American infantry even engaged. In contrast, U.S. losses were significantly lower than anticipated for an assault on heavily fortified positions, illustrating the effectiveness of preemptive bombardment and combined arms coordination. These outcomes reinforce the strategic value of artillery as a force multiplier and reshaped U.S. planning for future operations across the Pacific. Japanese commanders, surviving officers among them, reflected on the overwhelming superiority of American artillery. Many acknowledged in post-war interviews that they had underestimated the range, precision, and mobility of the howitzers. Attempts to mount counter-barrages were largely ineffective, hampered by the Americans' ability to redeploy guns quickly and coordinate fire with infantry and air support. The psychological shock of earth-shaking bombardments compounded the tactical disadvantage, leaving commanders struggling to maintain control over fragmented units. The success of American artillery also influenced broader military doctrine. The Saipan campaign demonstrated that well-planned, continuous shelling could neutralize even the most heavily fortified positions while preserving the lives of attacking forces. This lesson was incorporated into subsequent operations, including Peleliu and Iwo Jima, where artillery played a central role in shaping the battlefield before infantry assaults. Military historians would later describe these campaigns as proof that artillery had evolved into a decisive instrument of modern warfare, capable of achieving both physical destruction and psychological domination. For the American crews operating the howitzers, the aftermath was both satisfaction and exhaustion. These men had endured extreme heat, logistical challenges, and the constant threat of counterattack. Yet the results of their work were undeniable. The meticulous coordination, discipline, and endurance required to maintain continuous bombardments had not only destroyed enemy positions, but had fundamentally altered the nature of the battle. The campaign validated the idea that human skill, combined with technology, could achieve overwhelming strategic advantage. On a strategic level, Saipan's capture marked a turning point in the Pacific War. Securing the island allowed the U.S. to establish airfields within striking distance of the Japanese home islands, enabling bombing campaigns that would escalate in intensity over the following year. The effectiveness of artillery in this campaign reinforced the American advantage in firepower, training, and coordination, establishing patterns that would define the final stages of the Pacific theater. Even years after the conflict, Japanese accounts of the bombardment remained vivid. Veterans described the sensation of the ground trembling under their feet, the deafening roar of shells, and the impossibility of maintaining defensive order. These reflections underscored a central truth. The shock and awe created by artillery extended far beyond physical damage, influencing morale, decision-making, and the psychological capacity to resist. Saipan had shown the world that warfare had entered a new phase. Artillery was no longer a supporting tool. It was a decisive instrument capable of shaping battles, shaping minds, and shaking the very earth beneath one's feet. For Japanese commanders, the lesson was clear and bitter. Under modern, coordinated firepower, even the strongest defenses could crumble, and the ground itself could betray those who trusted it most. The capture of Saipan confirmed the strategic and psychological supremacy of American artillery in the Pacific. Japanese defensive doctrine, once built around static fortifications and natural terrain, had proven vulnerable to precise, sustained bombardment. Commanders who had relied on cliffs, tunnels, and reinforced bunkers were forced to confront a new reality. Artillery could reach every corner of the battlefield, collapse structures from a distance, and demoralize soldiers before combat even began. The aftermath extended beyond immediate tactical outcomes. Surviving Japanese commanders reported the intense strain of coordinating defenses under continuous bombardment. Communication lines were severed, units became isolated, and soldiers' confidence eroded. Even highly experienced officers admitted that the psychological shock of earth-shaking artillery influenced battlefield decisions as much as the physical destruction of positions. Retreats, surrenders, and disorganized counterattacks often resulted more from fear than from exhaustion or injury. American observers noted that the integration of artillery with infantry, naval, and air support created a new template for modern warfare. The ability to coordinate multiple arms into a seamless, destructive force maximized effectiveness while minimizing casualties among attacking troops. Lessons learned from Saipan informed subsequent campaigns at Peleliu, Guam, and Iwo Jima, where artillery continued to serve as a decisive precursor to amphibious assaults. The psychological component, fear of ground-shaking bombardment, became recognized as a force multiplier, influencing both strategy and training. The physical destruction was staggering. Japanese bunkers, observation posts, and supply depots were obliterated. Cratered terrain forced defenders into exposed positions, while the cumulative effect of continuous shelling made movement perilous. Reports indicated that the Earth itself seemed hostile. Tremors and vibrations were noted to affect sleeping soldiers in tunnels, disrupt equipment, and collapse poorly reinforced structures. Artillery had not only destroyed fortifications, it had reshaped the topography of defense, leaving survivors with nowhere to hide. The psychological effect on American troops was also notable. Infantrymen landing after days of artillery barrages observed the devastation and recognized the value of coordinated firepower. Morale was bolstered by seeing enemy positions neutralized before direct engagement, reinforcing trust in leadership, planning, and technology. The campaign validated the training, discipline, and endurance of artillery crews, highlighting the critical role of non-frontline units in achieving victory. In the broader context of the Pacific War, Saipan's lessons influenced post-war military doctrine. Observers recognized that effective artillery required not just firepower, but meticulous planning, integration with other forces, and continuous logistical support. The psychological dimension, understanding how tremors, noise, and destruction affect enemy morale, became part of operational planning. Future commanders were trained to exploit both physical and mental effects, shaping campaigns in ways that extended far beyond conventional combat. For Japanese forces, the experience left lasting impressions. Surviving commanders reflected on the impossibility of resisting an enemy capable of dominating both terrain and perception. The combination of mobility, firepower, and coordination demonstrated that technological advantage could overcome even the most entrenched defenses. Memoirs and post-war interviews frequently emphasize the terror and helplessness induced by earth-shaking artillery, highlighting a pivotal shift in the nature of warfare. Victory was no longer determined solely by manpower, but by the ability to dominate battlefield space and mind. Saipan's capture also accelerated the strategic path toward Japan. With American forces firmly established on the island, airfields enabled bombing raids deep into Japanese territory, demonstrating the long-term consequences of decisive artillery operations. Artillery had not merely supported victory, it had enabled strategic leverage, amplifying the effectiveness of follow-on forces and shaping the campaign's trajectory toward eventual success. Ultimately, the aftermath of Saipan underscored a profound truth. Artillery was both a weapon of destruction and a tool of psychological domination. It had the power to shake the earth, disrupt cohesion, and reshape the battlefield. For Japanese commanders, it became a symbol of technological and strategic inevitability, a force they could neither anticipate fully nor withstand indefinitely. Story of Saipan and its earth-shaking artillery illustrates a profound evolution in modern warfare. It was no longer enough to rely on natural terrain, static defenses, or sheer determination. The Americans had demonstrated that firepower, coordination, and precision could dominate both the physical and psychological battlefield. The howitzers that rumbled across Saipan were more than instruments of destruction. They were agents of control, shaping the movements, choices, and morale of every defender. Japanese commanders, hardened by years of conflict, were forced to confront a reality they could not fully influence. Their carefully constructed bunkers crumbled, trenches filled with rubble, and even the very ground beneath them betrayed their expectations of stability. The earth itself became part of the enemy's arsenal, an unstoppable conduit for terror and disruption. Soldiers and officers alike found that survival depended not only on courage, but on the ability to adapt under relentless pressure. From the American perspective, Saipan exemplified the power of discipline, training, and technological advantage. Artillery crews endured extreme conditions, moving massive guns across coral reefs and jungles, calculating trajectories with precision, and sustaining unbroken fire. Their skill and endurance proved that modern warfare was as much about human ingenuity as it was about machinery. The ability to shape the battlefield before infantry even engaged highlighted the strategic and psychological potency of coordinated firepower. The legacy of these battles extends far beyond the Pacific Islands. Artillery demonstrated that victory could be achieved through both destruction and the manipulation of perception. Tremors that shook bunkers, craters that reshaped terrain, and relentless barrages that wore down morale revealed a new dimension of combat. Control over space and mind as much as over flesh and steel. This lesson influenced post-war military doctrine, shaping how future conflicts would integrate firepower with strategy, psychology, and technology. In the end, Saipan teaches that the most decisive weapons are not always the ones closest to the front lines. Sometimes they lie in the precision of a gun crew, the timing of a barrage, and the unseen tremors that ripple through both earth and spirit. The howitzers had done more than destroy. They had redefined warfare, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape, the minds of defenders, and the history of strategy itself.